can I stand up? No.
Yes.
Went up to them. Stood over like that. I'm not helping that. So I stabbed him first there. I've done it a few times. While I was doing that, my voices were laughing and laughing and laughing.
Teens, once perceived as young and innocent, have now become daunting figures in society. Many of them are believed to struggle with uncontrollable mental issues, leading them to commit heinous crimes that stole away their innocence. Today's video delves into the crimes that were committed by the most feared teens in prison. Lionel Tate. Lionel Tate was not your average kid. He had a reputation that struck fear into the hearts of his fellow classmates. He was known as the playground bully, the type of kid who would pick on others just for the sake of it. If you were smaller than him, you were his target. Tate's love for violence was evident from an early age. He reveled in his power over others, taking pleasure in their pain and suffering. He would taunt and torment his victims, leaving them bruised and broken both physically and emotionally. His playground became a battlefield, and he was the ruthless commander. But what drove Lionel Tate to become such a bully? Some say it was a result of his troubled upbringing, while others believe it was simply a reflection of his own insecurities. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear. Lionel Tate had a dark side that was impossible to ignore. Despite his reputation for violence, no one could have imagined that this 14-year-old boy was capable of cold-blooded murder. The line between child's play and adult consequences became blurred, and the consequences would be devastating. One thing you should know about Tate is that he had an obsession with wrestling. He couldn't get enough of it. His favorite TV show was WWE SmackDown, where he watched his idol Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson perform crazy stunts on his opponents. Each time he watched, he would practice the moves at home, honing his skills and fueling his violent tendencies. On the surface, Lionel Tate seemed like any other teenager. He had dreams and aspirations, just like any other kid his age. But beneath that facade, there was a darkness that consumed him. He was a ticking time bomb, waiting for the right moment to explode. And that moment came on that fateful day, July 29, 1999. Tate's mother asked him to babysit a little 6-year-old girl named Tiffany Unick. It was a hot afternoon and Kathleen felt very sleepy, so she went upstairs to take a nap, leaving the two children alone. Tate, bored and restless, decided to entertain himself by playing with Tiffany. But what started as a game quickly turned into a nightmare. He began to practice the wrestling moves he had learned from his favorite TV show on the unsuspecting 6-year-old. He punched, kicked, and stomped on her, oblivious to the pain he was inflicting. As the minutes turned into hours, Tate's violent outburst escalated. When Tate finally realized something was terribly wrong, it was too late. Tiffany had stopped breathing, her life snuffed out by the very person who was supposed to protect her. Panic set in, and Tate ran upstairs to tell his mother what had happened, but there was no undoing the irreversible damage he had caused. The coroner's findings were horrifying. Tiffany's young body bore the marks of a savage attack. She bled from her mouth, nose, eyes, and ears. Her skull was fractured in multiple places, as were her ribs. Her brain had been flattened inside her skull, and her liver had broken free, floating freely inside her body. The extent of her injuries was equivalent to falling from a 3-story building. When the police arrived to arrest him, he initially protested, claiming that all he had done was give Tiffany a bear hug. But as the investigation progressed, more horrors were uncovered. Lionel admitted to trying to toss Tiffany onto a couch but missed, instead slamming her into the stairwell banister. It became clear that this schoolyard bully knew the level of his brutality was completely over the top. The trial took place in the Broward County Circuit Court, where Lionel Tate was tried as an adult under Florida law. Prosecutor Ken Padowitz made it clear that Lionel Tate's intent to harm Tiffany Unick was enough to warrant a conviction of first-degree murder. He argued that Tate didn't have to explicitly say, "I'm going to kill Tiffany Unick." The evidence showed that he planned to act, and the consequence of his actions was the death of an innocent child. Lionel Tate, the youngest person in American history to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, was now facing a grim future behind bars. 2 years after Tiffany's killing in 2003, an appeals court overturned Lionel Tate's conviction. He was released a year later after pleading guilty to second-degree murder, which resulted in a year of house imprisonment and 10 years of probation. In September 2004, authorities found him brandishing an 8-inch knife just a few blocks from his home. He was arrested for what was termed a pizza robbery 9 months later. Philip Chisholm. Philip Chisholm, born on January 21, 1999, seemed like an ordinary teenager on the surface. However, his background and early life would reveal a troubled individual with a dark secret lurking beneath the facade. In the fall of 2013, Chisholm had recently moved from Tennessee to Danvers, Massachusetts, where he enrolled as a freshman at Danvers High School. Prior to his arrival, he was relatively unknown at the school, except for his reputation as a talented soccer player. However, there were signs that Chisholm was struggling with personal issues. One report described him as antisocial and really tired and out of it. It was evident that he was going through a difficult time as his parents were going through a divorce. Despite his troubled background, Chisholm's arrival at Danvers High School initially went unnoticed. He blended in with his peers, and his quiet demeanor did not raise any red flags. However, beneath his calm exterior, a darkness was brewing. Colleen Ritzer, a 24-year-old math teacher at the school, unknowingly became entangled in Chisholm's web of secrets. Chisholm was no exception to Ritzer's caring nature. At the end of one class, she complimented his drawing skills and asked him to stay after school so she could assist him in preparing for an upcoming test. Little did she know that this innocent act of kindness would lead to her tragic demise. On October 22, 2013, the day of the unthinkable act, Chisholm's emotions were already running high. When Ritzer mentioned his recent move from Tennessee, he grew visibly upset. This seemingly innocent comment triggered something within him, and he began to spiral into a dark place. According to witnesses, Chisholm's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was observed talking to himself, a sign of the turmoil brewing within his mind. The combination of his personal struggles and the triggering comment from Ritzer created a volatile mix that ultimately led to a horrific act of violence. As the school day came to a close, Chisholm followed Ritzer into a school bathroom. Armed with a box cutter, he confronted her in a moment of sheer terror. What transpired next was beyond comprehension. In a shocking display of violence, Chisholm robbed Ritzer, taking her credit cards, iPhone, and even her underwear. He then proceeded to and stab her 16 times in the neck with the box cutter. Chisholm's actions did not end there. What he did next further proved he was a villain. He meticulously planned his escape, changing his outfits throughout the crime to avoid suspicion. He left the bathroom wearing a hood over his head and walked outside to the parking lot. Minutes later, he returned wearing a new white t-shirt, leaving behind a trail of evidence that would ultimately lead to his capture. When both Chisholm and Ritzer failed to appear after school, they were reported missing. Police launched an investigation, and the school's newly installed security camera system provided crucial evidence: a box cutter, mask, gloves, and a change of clothing. The footage also captured his interactions with Ritzer as he followed her into the bathroom and later dragged her lifeless body out of the school. As the investigation unfolded, the extent of Chisholm's premeditation became apparent.
Colleen Ritzer's and murder were inextricably intertwined.
He had planned every detail, from the robbery to the and murder. The chilling nature of his actions left investigators and the community in disbelief. When police apprehended Chisholm the following morning, the evidence against him was overwhelming. He had not washed his hands, which were still covered in Ritzer's blood. In his possession, they found Ritzer's credit card and driver's license, along with her purse and underwear. The box cutter used in the crime was also discovered, its blade stained with dried blood. Chisholm's chilling confession sent shockwaves through the courtroom. When asked whose blood was on the box cutter, he calmly replied, "It's the girl's." When questioned about Ritzer's whereabouts, he callously stated, "She's buried in the woods." The coldness of his words only added to the horror of the crime. The jury was convinced of his guilt, and on February 26, 2016, he was found guilty on all charges. Graham Young. Born on September 7, 1947, Young displayed an early fascination with toxic substances that would shape his sinister path. Growing up in a seemingly ordinary family, Young's obsession with poison emerged at a young age. He would conduct dangerous experiments, using his family members as unknown subjects. Young's parents, Molly and Fred Young, were completely unaware of the danger their son posed. At just 14 years old, Young's twisted desires led him to commit his first act of poisoning. In 1961, he targeted his stepmother, Molly, with a deadly dose of antimony potassium tartrate, a toxic substance commonly used in the photography industry. Young's fascination with poison only intensified as he grew older. In 1962, he secured a job at a photographic film company in Bovingdon, Hertfordshire. It was here that he had easy access to a wide range of toxic chemicals, which he would later use to carry out his deadly acts. Young's colleagues at the company became unwitting victims of his sinister experiments. He would lace their tea and coffee with thallium, a highly toxic substance known for its devastating effects on the human body. His unsuspecting co-workers suffered from hair loss, paralysis, and excruciating pain. The true extent of Young's crimes only came to light when one of his co-workers, Bob Eagle, fell seriously ill and was hospitalized. Doctors were baffled by Eagle's symptoms and suspected foul play. Extensive tests revealed high levels of thallium in his system, leading them to suspect Young. The police launched a full-scale investigation into Young's activities. They discovered a pattern of poisonings that stretched back years, including the poison poisoning of Young's stepsister Winifred, who tragically did not survive. Young's motive for these heinous acts remains unclear. Some speculate that he derived a sadistic pleasure from watching others suffer, while others believe he was driven by a desire for control and power. In 1962, Young stood trial for murder and attempted murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he was found guilty. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment, ensuring that he would never be able to harm anyone again. However, even in the confines of his prison cell, Young's obsession with poison persisted. He continued to correspond with other notorious killers, exchanging letters that delved into the macabre world of toxic substances. Psychologists and criminologists were fascinated by Young's case, as it provided a unique opportunity to study the mind of a serial killer with a specific obsession. They sought to understand the motivations behind his actions and the depths of his depravity. Young's correspondence and writings revealed a disturbing level of knowledge and fascination with poison. He would discuss the effects of various substances, their potency, and even share recipes for deadly concoctions. Young was sent to Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric facility where he would spend the rest of his days. However, even behind bars, his obsession with poison persisted. Young continued to study toxicology and corresponded with other notorious killers, sharing his knowledge and experiences. Tragically, Young's reign of terror did not end with his imprisonment. In 1971, he managed to poison several staff members at Broadmoor Hospital, resulting in the death of one nurse, Marjorie Gardner. This shocking incident exposed the flaws in the institution's security measures and raised questions about Young's ability to manipulate those around him. In response to this incident, Young was transferred to Parkhurst Prison on the Isle of Wight, where he was kept under strict surveillance. However, his health began to deteriorate, and he passed away on August 1, 1990, at the age of 42. Aiden Fucci. Aiden Sean Fucci, at the age of 14, became a name synonymous with darkness and violence. He was a fellow student at Patriot Oaks Academy and lived near Tristan Bailey in Durban Crossing. According to witnesses, including his girlfriend and friends, Fucci often talked about killing people. He would openly express his plans to drag a random person into the woods and stab them. These fantasies of murder were dismissed by those around him as idle talk, never taken seriously. Fucci's fascination with violence and knives was a cause for concern among those who knew him intimately. His girlfriend revealed that he would often carry a knife and even go as far as pretending to slit her throat from behind. Fucci's friends described him as having a morbid fascination with knives, naming them picker and poker, and showing them off to others. The night of Tristan Bailey's death, Fucci's true nature was revealed. He asked for her number and convinced her to leave her home, meeting at a friend's house. Surveillance footage captured the two walking together towards a retention pond where Tristan's lifeless body would later be found. Fucci was seen returning alone, carrying his shoes, leaving behind a scene of unimaginable horror. As the investigation unfolded, the evidence against Fucci began to mount. A buck knife with a missing tip was discovered in a pond near Tristan's body. This knife matched a fragment found lodged in Tristan's scalp and was identified as belonging to Fucci. The presence of security video, DNA evidence, and the discovery of wet shoes and clothing stained with blood in Fucci's home further incriminated him. Throughout the trial, Fucci's behavior in jail only reinforced the darkness that resided within him. Incidents of fights, possession of contraband, bullying of inmates, and threats against guards showcased his lack of remorse and his propensity for violence. His claim of hearing voices in his head when angry raised concerns about his mental state. The shocking truth about Aiden Fucci is that behind his seemingly ordinary facade, there was a deeply disturbed individual with a fascination for violence and a disregard for the sanctity of life. According to police reports, on that fateful night, Aiden Fucci asked Tristan for her number. Little did she know that this seemingly innocent interaction would lead to her untimely demise. Fucci convinced Tristan to leave her home and meet him at a friend's house, setting in motion a chain of events that would end in tragedy. Surveillance footage captured two figures believed to be Fucci and Tristan walking together towards a retention pond in the area. It was near this pond that Tristan's lifeless body would later be discovered. The video showed them walking east on Saddlestone Drive, seemingly unaware of the horror that awaited them. Hours later, Fucci was seen returning alone, carrying his shoes. An autopsy conducted on Tristan's body revealed the gruesome extent of her injuries.
114 stab wounds, 49 defensive wounds, 35 wounds to the head and neck, 29 to the back and shoulder, and 6 fatal wounds.
She had suffered a staggering 114 stab or cutting wounds across her head, neck, shoulders, arms, hands, and back. The medical examiner noted that at least 49 of these wounds were defensive in nature, indicating that Tristan had fought valiantly for her life. The combination of physical evidence, witness testimonies, and Fucci's own actions painted a harrowing picture of a young man with a fascination for violence and a complete disregard for human life. Throughout the trial, Fucci's behavior in jail only reinforced the darkness that resided within him. Incidents of fights, possession of contraband, bullying of inmates, and threats against guards showcased his lack of remorse and his propensity for violence. His claim of hearing voices in his head when angry raised concerns about his mental state. Johns County Courtroom Judge R. Lee Smith sentenced Aiden Fucci, 16, to life in prison for the first-degree murder of Tristan Bailey on Mother's Day 2021. Thomas T.J. Lane. The dark and disturbing world of Thomas T.J. Lane, a name that sends shivers down the spines of those who remember the horrifying events that unfolded at Chardon High School. Born on September 19, 1994, Lane grew up in a small town in Ohio where he experienced a tumultuous childhood. From an early age, Lane faced numerous challenges and hardships. His parents' tumultuous relationship and frequent arguments created a chaotic environment at home. The constant tension and instability took a toll on Lane's emotional well-being, leaving him feeling isolated and misunderstood. As Lane entered his teenage years, his troubles only seemed to escalate. He struggled academically and socially, often feeling like an outcast among his peers. The combination of a troubled home life and a sense of alienation at school pushed Lane further into a dark and dangerous path. One pivotal event in Lane's life occurred when he was just 15 years old. His parents divorced, further destabilizing his already fragile world. The divorce left Lane feeling abandoned and resentful, fueling his growing anger and resentment towards those around him. On that fateful day in February 2012, Lane's anger and resentment reached a boiling point, leading to the horrific massacre that would forever scar the community of Chardon. He walked into the school cafeteria armed with a .22 caliber pistol, ready to unleash his pent-up rage on unsuspecting students. As the lunch period began, chaos erupted. Without warning, Lane opened fire, his shots echoing through the cafeteria. Panic and confusion filled the air as students scrambled for cover, desperately trying to escape the line of fire. The victims of Lane's senseless act of violence were innocent teenagers, their lives cut tragically short. Russell King Jr., a 17-year-old with a bright future ahead, fell victim to Lane's bullets. Daniel Parmenter, just 16 years old, had dreams and aspirations that were abruptly extinguished. Demetrius Hewlin, also 16, was a beloved member of the community, his loss leaving a void that could never be filled. Nick Walsack, a brave 17-year-old, was left paralyzed from the waist down, forever confined to a wheelchair. Joy Rickers and another student suffered injuries. As the trial commenced, Lane made his presence known. He entered the courtroom wearing a white t-shirt with the word "killer" scrawled across the front, a chilling display of his lack of remorse. The families of the victims looked on in disbelief, their hearts heavy with grief and anger. Throughout the trial, Lane's behavior continued to defy expectations. He showed a complete disregard for the gravity of the situation, often smirking and laughing during the proceedings. The families of the victims, already burdened with unimaginable pain, were further tormented by Lane's callousness. Thomas T.J. Lane was sentenced to 3 life terms in prison with no chance for parole. Shandelle Jackson. In the quiet streets of Milwaukee, a young university student's life was tragically cut short by the hands of Shandelle Jackson. Nathan Potter, a 21-year-old student at the University of Wisconsin, was simply walking home to his apartment when he became the target of a robbery. Jackson, along with his accomplice Derek Thomas, approached Potter with the intention of stealing his belongings. However, what started as a simple robbery quickly escalated into a horrifying act of violence. Without any provocation or reason, Jackson pulled out a weapon and shot Nathan Potter, ending his life in an instant. The shocking part? Potter wasn't even carrying any money. It was a senseless act of violence that left the community in shock and mourning the loss of a promising young life. But what was even more disturbing than the crime itself was Shandelle Jackson's complete lack of remorse. Throughout the trial, he showed no signs of sorrow or regret for his actions. In fact, he even had the audacity to smirk at the victim's family while being escorted out of the courtroom. Members of Jackson's own family began hurling insults at Nathan Potter's grieving mother. Their words dripped with hatred as they shouted, I hate you all," and proclaimed, "God's the judge." It was a chilling display of callousness and disregard for the pain he had caused. Is there such a thing as pure evil? We think so. The tension in the courtroom reached its peak when the judge delivered Shandelle Jackson's sentence, life in prison without the possibility of parole. It was a punishment that reflected the gravity of his crimes. But instead of accepting his fate with humility or remorse, Jackson's true nature was unleashed in a violent outburst.
Possibility for extended supervision. I know that is something that is reserved for the most serious of cases.
Cursing at the judge, Jackson's anger and defiance filled the room. The police officers present, seemingly anticipating his reaction, swiftly moved into action. They had witnessed his disruptive behavior throughout the trial and were prepared for any potential escalation. With the use of pepper spray and physical restraint, they were able to subdue Jackson, bringing an end to the chaos that had erupted in the courtroom. James Fairweather. It all began with the discovery of a lifeless body in Colchester's Castle Park. The brutal murder sent shockwaves through the community, and little did they know it was just the beginning. As the investigation unfolded, another life was tragically taken. A student named Nahid Al-Munir fell victim to a senseless act of violence on the Salary Brook Trail. Fear gripped the town as they realized a serial killer was on the loose. But what made this case even more shocking was the age of the perpetrator. James Fairweather, a mere 15-year-old schoolboy, was arrested and confessed to both murders.
I stabbed him first there. I've done it a few times.
It was a seemingly ordinary day in the picturesque town of Colchester, England, but little did the residents know a sinister presence lurked in the shadows, waiting to strike. In March of 2014, the tranquility of Colchester's Castle Park was shattered when a lifeless body was found. The victim, Jim Atfield, had been brutally stabbed to death, his life extinguished in a senseless act of violence. The gruesome scene sent shockwaves through the community, leaving them in a state of disbelief and fear. The police launched a full-scale investigation, leaving no stone unturned in their quest for answers. The community anxiously awaited updates, desperate for any information that could bring them a sense of security. But just when they thought the nightmare was over, another tragedy struck. 3 months later, the body of Nahid Al-Munir, a young student, was discovered on the Salary Brook Trail. The similarities between the two murders sent shockwaves through the community once again, confirming their worst fears. A serial killer was indeed on the loose. Fairweather's defense argued that his mental state and autism played a role in his actions, seeking to reduce the murder charges to manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. Fairweather's troubled background was further complicated by his mental state and autism. 3 psychiatrists diagnosed him with psychosis, claiming that he heard voices commanding him to kill. This diagnosis added another layer of complexity to the case. Fairweather's defense argued that his mental state and autism played a significant role in his actions, seeking to reduce the murder charges to manslaughter based on diminished responsibility. They painted a picture of a young boy trapped in the grip of his own mind. However, the prosecution saw a different side of the story. They argued that Fairweather was manipulating the system, fabricating his claims of psychosis to avoid a conviction for murder. The jury did not believe Fairweather's claims of diminished responsibility. He was held accountable for his crimes. In April 2016, he was found guilty of both murders and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 27 years. This is all we have in this video. If you love this video and would love to explore more of these, then click on any of the cards on your screen to explore.